This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 14 of Here's How. In this podcast, someone at the end and someone at the start of their career. Sometimes I think that maturity isn't all it's cracked up to be.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
Alan Shatter was a good guy once. He really was. He was elected to the Dáil at the age of 30 in 1981. Ireland was a very different country then. Divorce, homosexuality, even contraception were all illegal. It was the year before the passing of the Eighth Amendment. That's the one about the fetus and the mother having an equal right to life, which has caused so much trouble since. It seems very distant now, but he was a brash liberal reformer. He was berated by the Count Corla of the time for not wearing a formal jacket over his short-sleeved shirt. It was a long time ago. Shatter wrote a pamphlet criticising the Irish solution to an Irish problem, contraception law, which allowed tourists to bring, quote, a reasonable amount of contraceptives into the country for personal use. The pamphlet envisaged a customs officer counting whatever contraceptives, calculating the length of stay and asking each tourist how often they planned to have sex while they were in Ireland to calculate whether the supply exceeded a reasonable amount. He campaigned hard in the divorce referendum, even when it looked like it wasn't a politically smart thing to do. He stood up for his principles. He lost the Fine Gael whip by voting to ban hair coursing. He often criticised the legal profession. He's a solicitor, so he knows where the bodies are buried, and having worked in a solicitor's firm, he knew what they got up to. After 30 years in politics, he got his dream job, Minister for Justice. But it was too late. He'd gone native. I would guess that he was played by the mandarins in the department. Brian Purcell, the Secretary-General, ran the department which the Guerin Report called a closed, secretive and silo-driven culture which had significant leadership and management problems and ineffective management processes and structures to provide strong strategic oversight for the key agencies. Shatter relied on Purcell, apparently unquestioningly. Later, Shatter launched a laughable court case. Remember, he's a solicitor himself. He launched a laughable court case against the conclusions of the Guerin Report, and it was duly laughed out of court. The judge said that he could not see how Shatter, who was part of the government that had commissioned the report, could then complain about the consequences. He said Shatter never claimed that the report's conclusions were wrong in fact, and that Shatter should have been more concerned with how key documents had disappeared from his own department. And Shatter was thick as thieves with Garda Commissioner Martin Callanan. Apparently they texted each other many times a day. Shatter clearly didn't question the way Garda whistleblowers, people reporting extremely serious crimes, were subjected to a campaign of intimidation and harassment with, at the very least, the tacit approval of the Garda top brass. Callanan has now been utterly disgraced, but Shatter seems to think that Callanan has less to answer for in the affair than Enda Kenny. The clear undercurrent from the Fennelly report is that Kenny all but sacked Callanan, bypassing his own Minister for Justice, because of how close Shatter had become to Callanan. Callanan was running a massive illegal phone tapping scheme, and the Taoiseach apparently felt the need to take extreme measures to make sure that Shatter didn't stand in the way of removing him. Lots of ministers are incompetent or corrupt or both. But there are some people who go into politics determined to make a change for the better. Maybe they get caught up in the system. My heart leapt a little bit in 2011 when I heard Alan Shatter had been made Minister for Justice. I thought finally he gets a crack at real reform. But I was wrong. It's sad.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you want your point of view heard, dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. The lines are open 24/7 and you can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
On a Skype line, I'm joined by Bashir Otukoya. Bashir is a UCD Sutherland School of Law PhD candidate. He's also got 3 law degrees. Bashir, where are you from?
I'm from Drogheda, County Louth.
Oh, okay, and where are you really from?
Well, I was born in Nigeria, but I've been in Ireland since the age of 9. So I've been here for 15 years.
So really a large majority of your life you've spent in Ireland.
Yeah.
I asked that question because I think that's something, am I right, that people who don't look Irish, you're from Nigeria, you're black,
Yes.
I've seen you on Skype a few moments ago. Is that something, the type of question that you get quite often?
It is, and I just kind of wanted to reiterate from my article that I wasn't proclaiming that everybody that asked that question is racist, and I know I used the term implicit racist, but going further to that, people aren't implicitly trying to be racist. There's no harm intended. And it is quite an Irish thing to ask, where you from? Maybe they hear O'Donoghue or something, they're associated with Sligo. I'm probably wrong on that. But, something like that. So regionalism is something that's associated with Irish behaviour and characteristics. And is absolutely fine. In fact, I do it too, that if I see another, fellow black man, I'm more interested to know where is he from. Will he associate with me? Is he from Nigeria or somewhere else? And it's a relationship bonding, and it's a great conversation starter. So when I do say that, I'm not implying that everybody has been implicitly racist. However, I employ people to think of the impact that this question has on us, because obviously growing up, we're quite aware that we do not blend in with the society at large. That could be because of our religion or because of our race or, our language, et cetera, et cetera. But, and then when you're further asked, where are you from? And you say, Drogheda or Burr or Carrickmacross or any, local areas that's not Dublin, because Dublin is the main, multicultural hub. Mm-hmm. Anywhere that's not Dublin, that question, it kind of identifies that you don't belong here. It's what basically you're saying, that no, where are you really from? Because you're not from here. Even though I might have been born here, to, African parents or whatever, people don't know that about you, and they automatically assume that you don't identify as being Irish or whatever home country you're from, just because of your characteristics. And that's what I want people to really consider, that when they are asking that and someone gives an answer that's not from outside Ireland, obviously they don't want to talk about it, or they don't identify as belonging to an outside state or their second home, let's say, for example. They obviously identify as being Irish. That's why they've given you, their initial response is somewhere in Ireland. Had they given something else like Nigeria or Ghana, it means that they still identify as a Ghanaian and they're willing to talk about it. I mean, for example, the Syrians that are coming over here, in a couple of years' time, when you ask them, where are you really from, that automatically will, bring up traumatic experience that they've gone through. Obviously, they've fled Syria and tried to find a new home, and they will eventually find it here. Mm-hmm. And when they identify, and I'm talking about the children growing up now, and when they are adults and they are as Irish as the Irish themselves, and they are asked, where are you really from, that automatically begins to traumatize them, and it brings back traumatic memories of the experiences they had in the Mediterranean, or the journey to getting here, or psychological effects such as a cultural dissonance or even cognitive dissonance, where they question who they really are.
Do you think maybe there's a double standard there, that, for example, people are told when they're immigrants that they have a duty to integrate, that they're required
Absolutely.
to fit into the established culture. And then when somebody says to you, where are you from? And you say, I'm from Drogheda, you're treated maybe slightly suspiciously. But is that not really an indication
exactly,
that
that's
you have
exactly
integrated into
what I
Drogheda
tried
as it is?
to articulate in my article, is that if I say I'm from Drogheda, it obviously means, or maybe not so obvious, but it should signify that I associate myself as being a Droghedarian, or whatever you want to call it, that I associate as being a Dubliner, or, a Donegalian, or Sligo, I'm from Sligo or whatever. Had I not say that, had I say, oh, I'm from Nigeria, that, there's, my intention is there to say that I do identify myself as a Nigerian. And perhaps if you had asked me, where do you live? And I said Drogheda, those are two completely different questions. So where you're from people don't think about it, probably mainly because we are used to, we're born here, so we're used to being here, so it's not a question, we really think about it, which is why I was hoping that the article, would kind of get people thinking about, what it means to them to be Irish, and not just to be born here. And immigrants do have, I'll call it a duty to integrate, because, if you're looking for a new home, you do have that duty to make that place you want to call home your home. So you do, I'm not saying you do as the Irish do, but obviously you want to be able to have conversations about the things that Irish people do, and how, you can understand their culture as well as trying to get them to understand your culture. But you have to remember that there's only many cultures are in Ireland, and you don't expect the average Irishman to learn about all the different cultures.
So one other question then, Bashir. You've mentioned this, the kind of where you're really from question. Have you felt growing up, going to college, kind of out in the streets, have you ever felt any other of what you call these kind of subtle forms, perhaps not of intentional racism, but a bit of prejudice?
I'll give
that's
you an
under the
example.
surface?
When I was 17, 18, started college, I was looking for a job. And, I had a standard CV as any normal person would. And I just found it really difficult to get a job. But then I saw on my CV that it actually stated my nationality there, and I had Nigerian. So I changed it to, Irish, despite me not having an Irish passport. I changed it to Irish just to see what the results would be. And lo and behold, a week later, I got 3 phone calls for an interview, and I eventually got a job after 2 weeks of just that change. Now, that could be, that could have just been coincidence. Yeah, it could have just been a coincidence.
It's a small sample size.
Those are the things we think about in our head. You, as an immigrant, you're always, especially as a young immigrant, you're always thinking, how do I fit in? Am I ever going to fit in? What can I do to make them like me, let's say? So that's just a small example of, and this isn't just my view. This is, there's a report, that was published there by the Immigrant Council not so long ago. It's called Voices of Young Migrant Men. And these are situations that occur all the time. For example, the Gardaí asking you, where you're from. Legally, they've no right to, unless they're an immigration officer, they shouldn't be asking you where you're from.
Mm-hmm. But one question, isn't it possible, everybody growing up, runs into difficulties from time to time. Everybody runs into people who are mean to them or whatever. Do you think there's a risk that immigrants who are in the country will, by default, blame any misfortune or any bad treatment that they get on racism when it could just be noise in the system?
Yeah, that is true. And that does tend to happen. People say we use the race card. But it is really difficult. And that's why when I say that earlier on, that this is things that we think about because we are forever trying to fit in, let's say. So when we don't, automatically we think, oh, well, he's obviously racist, or, my teacher gave me 69 instead of 70, he was just being racist. He could have just given me the 70, etc., etc. These are things we will talk about. It's natural for us to think that we're being prejudiced against because it's just the easiest response to give. But sometimes it is true. But it's not so much to do with the second part. It's more so to do with our own mental state, because we have grown up with racist incidences and social exclusion, social difficulty, and, our identity is always being questioned. So we grow up with these, this view that everyone is against you, and if they don't do something that you like, it's mainly because of your color or your religion or where you're from, etc. So
okay, I should say that you mentioned in the article that you wrote that I picked up on, you mentioned Identity Ireland a couple of times. I should say that I've contacted them several times, asked them to come on the podcast, and I haven't had a positive response from them. But nevertheless, do you think that there's a point there? People who've lived in this country for generations can occasionally come a cropper and be homeless or whatever. Does the Irish nation have more of a duty to somebody who's sleeping rough in Dublin City than they do to someone who's sleeping rough in a refugee camp in Greece or Turkey?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the state has a duty to its citizens to uphold the welfare of its citizens. And the citizens of Ireland are should be foremost, the most important. But doesn't mean we forget or neglect our human duty. We're the most charitable country certainly in Europe. I'm not so sure about the world, but Ireland is a charitable country. So we do keep an eye out on international crisis, and we're particularly good for that. It doesn't mean we forget about the homeless situation in Ireland. But it doesn't mean we forget about the international crisis and refugees and, asylum seekers here, because we have let them in, and we do have that duty to, ensure their welfare as well. I know what they came looking for, safe asylum. There's been that argument, they are safe, they have a housing and they're fed and everything. But you don't want a life where you're essentially in a prison camp for 15 years of your life and then to be out and not knowing anything about society. Just to go back, so, we do have a duty, that the state does have a duty to, trying to fix the homeless crisis, but we've always kept an eye on international crisis, so we shouldn't just forget about, asylum seekers in Greece or in Italy.
And what do you see as your future?
My future? Something I never really considered, but I like to stay in academia. The Voices of Young Men report said that there was a lack of, migrant influences, in the media or, in the judicial system, in our schools. It's mainly white, Irish, teachers or, judges or policemen. Mm-hmm. So it is quite important that immigrant men like myself go out to the public and express themselves, so that younger generations growing up have, someone to look. I don't want to say look up to me, but at least, mm-hmm. People like me should be doing something, either maybe in the court someday, or maybe even in a lecture hall, lecturing the younger generation.
Bashir Otukoya, PhD candidate at the UCD Sutherland School of Law. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thanks very much, William.
Make your view heard. Dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. You can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
That's almost the end of episode 14 of Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, published on 22nd of September 2015. References for everything that I mentioned in the show are listed in this episode's page on the here'show.ie website. If you can think of a topic or want to suggest someone to include, and that could be you, then let me know. If you like the podcast, please go on iTunes and write a nice review. Also, please like the show on Facebook, please follow @Here's How Podcast on Twitter, and of course, subscribe to the show. You can use iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, or any other podcast app or software. And you can do all of that, or get in touch with the show, right from www.here'show.ie. And please don't forget to go to the website and click on the link to vote for Here's How in the 2015 Blog Awards Ireland. The next show will be uploaded shortly. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.